It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. With me today, Conservative MP Scott Benton, Labour MP Christian Wakeford, The Sun's Deputy Political Editor Kate Ferguson and The Guardian's Chief Political Correspondent Jessica Elgert. Today, the economy shrinks for the second month in a row. Are we heading for recession?
We've got an inflationary price bump that we've got to get through, and I think we'll get through it very strongly indeed.
The Foreign Secretary will publish a bill to change post-Brexit arrangements in Northern Ireland. The EU doesn't like it.
A new low in terms of the relationship between Britain and Ireland, which is something that many of us have worked so hard to protect and enhance.
The Court of Appeal is set to rule on the government's Rwanda asylum plan. Has the policy descended into farce? Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is under investigation by parliamentary authorities over rules relating to outside earnings. We'll ask Christian Wakeford, who defected to Labour earlier this year, whether he has any regrets. Let's start with the headline about the economy. Here it is in BBC News. Fears for UK economy grow as higher prices bite. This follows the latest GDP figures that are out today, showing the UK economy contracted by 0.3% in April. That's the second consecutive month the economy has contracted. Are we heading for recession, Scott?
Time will tell. Over the last 18 months, the government and the Prime Minister have got the big calls right on rolling out the vaccine, that £400 billion worth of support for businesses and schemes such as furlough throughout the pandemic. And what that has meant is we were practically the first major economy to leave those COVID restrictions. We had record GDP growth, the highest in the entire G7 last year.
That was after the UK economy contracted by the most the year before.
We had record GDP growth and now we are in a cost of living crisis. So as the Prime Minister just said there on the clip, the next 18 months is going to be very difficult for businesses, for households. That's why we are putting the support in to help vulnerable households primarily on the cost of living. But it is going to be a difficult period, not just for the UK, but for the entire global economy.
Is the UK heading for recession?
Well, I think if we listen to the head of the CBI, well, yes, we are. You know, I think
he said we could be, unless there is some serious government intervention, we could be by the end of the year.
Well, we've been calling for government intervention since January in regards to the cost of living crisis, and it only took them to saving Boris Johnson's neck to actually try to do something about that, and that was over 4 months of calling out for it. So in terms of actually trying to deliver, I don't think the government has actually really thought about doing anything to make either the economy grow, tackle the cost of the living crisis meaningfully, because they've done something now. It's going to get a lot worse, especially when we see price caps increasing again in October. I think we really need to be tackling issues now, but when we see the issues of the OECD saying we're one of the lowest growth economies in the world,
well, we've seen
the OBR reducing growth figures for this year, I think it's going to be a really tough time.
The government says, though, it has intervened to the tune of £37 billion to help with the cost of living crisis. But do you think we're heading for a recession?
Well, the figures don't look good, do they? I think the CBI says we're teetering on the edge of recession. We've had 2 months now of contraction. And if you talk to normal people, ordinary Brits, they can barely afford to fill up their tank of petrol. Prices are rocketing and the economy is flatlining. So this is obviously a huge, huge issue for Boris. What he's got to do is try and boost growth. That's what him and the Chancellor need to try and do now. But the longer the economy stays in the doldrums, I think the clamour for tax cuts will get louder and louder and louder. And if there's one thing all Tories agree on, it's not very much at the moment, but it's tax cuts.
Do they all agree on it?
Well, all wings of the parliamentary party.
Do you think we're heading for recession?
I mean, I think that if you look, what are the ingredients for a recession? Weak growth, rapid price rises.
We have to have two consecutive quarters, don't you, of negative growth.
And those two ingredients are clearly there in the figures today. I think one of the things the economists will be looking at next month will be whether what's happening to consumer spending when people see those lower pay packets after that national insurance hike. Do we see people radically reduce their spending? That is something that it would also be another worrying factor.
The government, again, would say that other countries, other developed countries, are also struggling, perhaps not quite to the same extent in terms of the rate of inflation or perhaps in the OECD predictions for the economy next year, but that this is a global issue.
I think you can argue to a certain extent that there are global problems. Everyone's experiencing that crunch on energy, which is fueling energy prices. But other countries have intervened, in different ways. We've seen much cut off fuel prices, for example, across Europe compared to what's happened in the UK.
Do you support the idea of tax cuts now?
I do, and just to come back, this is a global issue. The UK is in exactly the same position here as every developed
Well, it's
country.
not exactly the same.
We've put in this unprecedented £37 billion worth of support, which primarily goes to disadvantaged families. £1,200 is a huge amount of support for helping people with the cost of living. In terms of tax cuts, all Conservatives do agree that the best way to stimulate the economy in this difficult period would potentially be tax cuts, of course. We do have a national insurance decrease, £330 tax cut effective from next month.
Well, hang on, but national insurance contributions are going up. Yes, there are some people taking out the threshold.
families will have a tax cut on national insurance.
We have the highest tax rates, I think, since the 1940s, the individual tax burden. So, I mean, obviously, I think the question for Boris and Rishi is, do you think tax cuts turbocharge growth? And if you do, where are they?
Which ones would you like to see? What sort of tax cuts?
Well, it's not for me to preempt the decisions of the Chancellor primarily on this issue.
But you said Conservatives agree on low taxation. At the moment, they are presiding over higher taxation. Specifically, where would you like to see those tax cuts?
I think there's a number of different arguments at the moment. We've got plans on national insurance, we've got plans on income tax. Obviously, there are calls for looking at fuel duty once again, so I'm sure the Chancellor will make those calls at the appropriate time. But let's not forget, we do have to pay for public services. We're spending a record amount on our hospitals, on NHS, on the schools, on supporting families with a cost of living, and this needs to be paid for. Well, the Labour Party would know all about tax. Under Keir Starmer, £2,000 extra would be the tax burden due to your unaffordable spending commitments. So,
well, let him answer.
Clobbered under Labour even higher.
In the 70s.
Right, are you saying that under a Labour government the overall tax burden would be lower?
Oh, we certainly want to put taxes up during the cost of the living crisis.
Laughable.
Yeah, well, to say this, Scott, I mean, the Conservatives did put up national insurance contributions as we were heading into a global crisis. Have we done anything to help in regards to that? No. So everyone's paying a lot more tax. In regards to the fuel duty cuts, there's been so little in terms of actual delivery behind that. It's all well and good announcing a review now, but how are we actually making sure that actually hits everyone who actually needs this help now? So those, the workers, the social workers, anyone who actually needs a car to travel anywhere.
So why won't Labour say that they'd reverse it if they were in government?
Well, similar to what the Tories said going into 2010, you can only really say what tax cuts or what tax implications you're going to do when you know what the full picture looks like.
2 years
would the tax increase have actually done anything?
No policies on the table.
All right, Scott, final word on this. What were you saying?
Well, 2 years into a Keir Starmer leadership of the opposition, they have no policies whatsoever. £96 billion.
Except you have just adopted the windfall tax on oil and gas companies, which I believe was a Labour policy.
And a Labour Party slogan for Boris's big reset speech as well, being on your side.
£96 billion worth of unaffordable spending commitments under Labour. They would clobber hard-working families in my constituencies with tax rises, as they always do.
Just like the government.
All right, let's talk about the Northern Ireland Protocol, because it has been billed as a very big day. We are expecting the government to publish legislation that would allow the government to override parts of the agreement on post-Brexit trade arrangements for Northern Ireland. It has meant that Northern Ireland remains in the EU single market for goods to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, but has created an effective border down at the Irish Sea where checks are carried out instead. Let's talk to our Europe correspondent in Brussels, Jessica Parker. What are we expecting in this bill?
So we're expecting some pretty significant potential changes in this legislation. It would look to create a green lane, so there aren't checks on goods arriving into Northern Ireland from Great Britain that are destined to stay in Northern Ireland, with, I think, promises of surveillance to try and stop those kinds of goods then going and filtering down into the EU single market via the Republic of Ireland. There'd also be a sort of dual regulatory regime, so businesses could choose to follow either EU product standards or UK product standards, applying UK rules in terms of VAT and state aid to Northern Ireland, and as well really limiting the role of the European Court of Justice. The UK has for a time been saying it's not acceptable in their view that the ECJ polices this treaty. So that will be some of what we get, but we need to wait for the further details, which should be coming later this afternoon.
What's been the reaction, Jessica, from the EU so far?
Well, we haven't had a kind of official reaction from the EU. I think what's going to happen is that they will look at this legislation. We expect to hear from the European Commission's lead negotiator, Maroš Šefčovič, a bit later on, where I think you'll hear some of the kind of language we've heard before, saying that they don't think that the UK should do this, warning them against breaching an international agreement that was only signed a couple of years ago. But in terms of a more detailed response, I think that's going to come probably Wednesday, when we should hear what kind of retaliatory action the EU might take. And I think the initial appearance of that could be relaunching legal action that was paused last year, as the EU said, as a kind of gesture of goodwill to give the talks on the protocol a bit of breathing space. Further down the line, and I am talking further down the line, if things escalate, if this legislation goes the whole way, if it is seen as very significant from the EU, there is more talk of this idea that you could see tariffs applied on UK goods, and that's when we get into this kind of talk about a so-called trade war. But legislation, as we know, takes quite a long time to work its way through Parliament, and this is expected to meet some resistance. And likewise, EU legal action takes some time as well. In the meantime, I think what to watch out for do negotiations over the protocol resume? Can any progress be made between the two sides?
Well, let's find out. Jessica Parker, thank you very much there in Brussels for us. We can talk to Danuta Hübner, Polish MEP, been on the programme with us before. She sits on the European Parliament's Trade Committee. Hello to you, Danuta. We don't know what the contents are going to be until later on this afternoon, but Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has said today these are a relatively trivial set of adjustments and relatively simple to implement. Does that reassure you?
No, not at all. I wouldn't say it's a big day. I would say that it's a bad day for our relationship and for the people of Northern Ireland. I think it's not really clear for us today whether the bill will go towards a direct rejection of the crucial part of the Irish protocol, or it will rather go towards giving prerogatives to the ministers to be applied under certain conditions. My worry is that it will be a mixture of both, but we have to wait and see. So I think that we don't see much good faith or political will on the UK side to look at the Commission proposal to fully exploit the potential that we have in the protocol, and we showed already during those 18 months behind us a lot of flexibilities. So we don't see this possibility now, and I don't know. I can imagine that there will be soon a meeting between the Liz Truss and Maroš Šefčovič, the Vice President of the Commission, but there will be also action, I think, on the EU side, quite clear.
But do you accept that the Northern Ireland Protocol is not working for everyone? It's not working for all the communities in Northern Ireland, and the Unionist just to say that the Unionist community, or the DUP, I should say, the Democratic Unionist Party, is refusing to rejoin power sharing in Stormont, which is critically important for Northern Ireland until this issue of the protocol is resolved.
No, of course, one cannot forget that we have a piece of international law, and there is also a governance system and dispute settlement system. So we have a framework to work on it, but somehow the government of UK is always choosing this unilateral approach, which I think is a very bad approach. There is a big politics there in Northern Ireland as well. There is ideology, but I think there is also the interest of the business community, of people there. And I think that we cannot just hear from the UK only this renegotiation argument instead of looking for solutions which have been already proposed by the Commission in October. Now the Commission is converting them into legal acts, and we already proved, I think, with the medicine issue how we can find within the protocol solutions. Right. So I would say that we still need to sit, and I think there is time. Otherwise, of course, there is the mentioned already infringements and retaliation and all those things, which would be bad.
What do you say then in response to the Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis saying that your claims, and I mean the EU's claims that you've repeated of flexibility, are disingenuous, that it isn't really about flexibility because the UK government wants to fundamentally change the way the protocol is implemented, and yet you still talk about flexibility that the UK government hasn't taken up?
Yeah. because, we trust that something that we negotiated with, which is an international agreement, does have to have a chance to be implemented and function. Actually, the 18 months were not the months when the protocol was really used to solve the issues, because all the Commission proposals were not even discussed. There was this unilateral action taken by the UK going for just political sovereignty-based argument without really looking at the substance, without really listening also to the business community. Northern Ireland.
Can I just put to you two issues then? Because you say there's been flexibility on the EU side. What about these so-called green lanes that have been suggested? They sound like quite a sensible proposal. You sit on the Trade Committee about having those goods from GB destined for Northern Ireland to just go through without any checks, and only the ones that are destined for the EU single market and Ireland to be checked. Would you agree to that?
But we cannot just forget that behind that there is this famous Brexit which happened. And we are the single market of 450, more than 400. There's also Norway with us and Liechtenstein.
So the answer is no to that from your perspective.
We just have to look and discuss and see what can be done within the protocol. There was never an because it was always rejected by UK government. They just need to and talk.
So the UK government would say, well, where's the flexibility then? That's a proposal. That's a tangible proposal. Not talking about goods that are destined for the EU single market and Ireland. Those can be checked. But the ones with, all sorts of trader schemes that are definitely only going to go to Northern Ireland, can that not be changed within the protocol?
The challenge is to identify those products which are at risk, where we are talking here. And this is what we have to really discuss. We don't have full access, even though there is improvement to the IT system to have the real-time control over the products which are moving between the two parts of Ireland. And so that's the issue, that there is this permanent repetition of let's renegotiate without giving the chance to the whole system to start working, but taking into account both the fact that Northern Ireland is part of UK jurisdiction and UK single market, and it is at the same time part of EU single market. So there must be a solution that would satisfy both parties.
Can I ask you about the other thing, which is the European Court of Justice? The UK government would like to limit the role of the European Court of Justice as an arbiter in disputes like this one and any other trade disputes. Is it a red line for you, Danuta, or is that something that could be limited?
The red line is that ECJ is the European institution, which is the only European institution that has the right to interpret European law. And we cannot just, for the sake of relation with one extremely important and dear to us third country, just get rid of this function, which is treaty-based and which is just the obligation put on ECJ. So we cannot move this way, but there is still a lot already in the agreement that we have that is limiting the role and that doesn't create this direct impact which the UK is seeing everywhere of the ECJ.
Danuta Hübner, thank you very much for joining us. Scott Benton, listening to Danuta Hübner there, talking about this is a bad day for relations between the EU and the UK, and that the agreement was done in bad faith, a unilateral approach to potentially break the law, as the EU thinks it will, this legislation. What's the government doing?
Well, that's not an approach and I personally recognise. The simple fact is there are huge problems in Northern Ireland created by the protocol. Businesses and residents can't receive goods going within our own country from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. We have a situation where the devolved administration cannot function because particular parties will not go back into an assembly until this is sorted out. What that means is schools, hospitals, cost of living crisis, all those issues in Northern Ireland cannot be resolved and move forward until we have a functioning assembly. So the government has acted in good faith here. We've tried for 18 months to negotiate with our EU partners, and it's quite clear that they lack the flexibility needed to take this forward. The door is always open to those negotiations.
Is it? You're about to introduce legislation to override parts of the internationally agreed treaty that you made with the EU.
Not at all. The government and Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary have been clear. The door is open to negotiations continuing, but we have to see flexibility from the EU.
All right, what do you want to see then?
We haven't seen that.
What do you want to see happen?
Well, we need pragmatic solutions to find a way forward.
What are those, Scott?
Well, for example, the government has potentially offered a trusted trader scheme today. I think there's certainly merit in that. For example, a packet of ham sandwiches being able to move from Great Britain to Northern Ireland without barriers in place. That is not acceptable. It's not occurring at the moment, and that green light for so certain goods could allow that to happen. That's the flexibility we need.
Christian?
Well, I'm just disappointed that the entire Northern Ireland protocol seems to come down to packeted ham sandwiches. I think when we're talking about flexibility, no, I agree, but that needs to be on both sides. And at the moment, it's clear to see that trying to deal with the UK government, we are seen as being, a bad faith trader. Through the internal markets bill, where it was breaking the law in a very specific way in a very specific time to...
Is that a bill you voted for?
To now actually overwriting a international treaty that's been in place for, just about 2 years. So to go back in place and actually just try to say, well, actually, the protocol that's doing exactly what it was intended to do, we now don't want it just to suit the DUP. Actually, when you look at the rest of the Northern Ireland parties, most of them are actually in support of it.
I'm flabbergasted by your comments. You've spoken in Parliament about the need for frictionless trade. This is exactly what we're trying to do. And some of those problems with the internal market bill, these are pieces of legislation you've voted for in the past. You've been a cheerleader for Brexit. You voted for the protocol just like I did. So I'm afraid it's somewhat ironic that you are now crowing about some of the problems this has supposedly created, having voted for these. When you're a Conservative Member of Parliament.
Let him answer.
I'm saying there is a need for flexibility, but we need to trade. We need that flexibility and conversation to be in good faith, and that's not taking place at the moment. I've spoken very publicly about the issues of the whipping system previously, and you'll know all about that as well. But I think when we get to where we are, we do need a solution that works not just for the UK, not just for Northern Ireland, but for the entire island of Ireland as well. So I do think we need to go into conversations with good faith. There are some details that do need ironing out and improving, but just to ditch an international treaty that was signed, just over 2 years ago, that's not the way to go.
I mean, as a Tory MP, you supported the government's internal market bill, now an act, which set out how the internal market of the UK would function once it had left the EU. In September 2020, you accused Labour of trying to reduce the great ship Britannia to nothing more than a sluggish canal barge. Yes, time has elapsed and you have changed parties, but how do you explain that view?
Oh, I think we do come down to particular lines when there's a whip involved and everything. But at the time, there were concerns and there were lines that were being put forward. Was the protocol needed? Yes. Was the internal market bill an avenue to go down? I think in hindsight it probably wasn't, because if anything, that's made part of a negotiation, part of this approach for frictionless trade, which is what we all really should be hoping for, has made that much more difficult to actually achieve.
Is the government, as some people are suggesting, being held hostage by the European Research Group when it comes to this issue?
Oh, right. Well, I don't know about that. I think that's probably a little bit over-egged. This is the... we remember that block, don't we, from the Brexit wars. This will all reek a little bit of 1718 arguments, doesn't it? I think with this issue, there is a real political issue facing Number 10, which they have to come up with a plan to try and solve. Power sharing in Northern Ireland has collapsed. That needs both communities to come together and partake for it to work. That is the nature of the Good Friday Agreement. The DUP have said they're not going to unless and until these checks are lifted. And in reality, that red lane, that green lane, I think most Brits would think that makes sense. I think it's down to the EU to say if that's impossible to enact. I'm not sure it is impossible to enact. So, yes, there will be people that say, Boris signed up to this protocol, this is his protocol, how dare he rip it up now? But there's also a reality about the political situation. We have to be able to have free trade within the union of the UK.
Is it a little bit like 3D chess, Jessica?
I think it is a little bit, and I thought it was quite revealing something that Scott said just now about negotiating. Of course, we're ready to return to negotiations. Now, a lot of Tory MPs who are instinctively bristle at this kind of idea, the potential of enacting a bill that will override international law. And that's not just, by the way, the kind of soft Tory wets who really didn't like Brexit in the first place. It's the kind of loyally Tories or even Brexiteers who just think it looks bad for the UK's international reputation. But are they willing to let this go reasonably far down the parliamentary stages as a negotiating tactic, which essentially is what the IM bill was, and frankly worked. So I think Scott sort of spelt it out there.
Did you let the cat out of the bag there, Scott?
No, not at all. Negotiations are ongoing. They have been for 18 months.
But is that what this is, a negotiating tactic?
Since February.
I'd be very, very surprised if that's the case. But with respect, there is also other things going on in Europe, as we frequently talk about, which do take the Foreign Secretary's time. We need flexibility here on both sides. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary have all made that clear. But I'm afraid at the moment what we are not seeing is flexibility on the side of the EU. They have flatly ruled out any changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I'm afraid it's at present the way in which the protocol is implemented which is causing these situations. When we voted for it in good faith as Conservative members of Parliament, we did expect a light touch regulatory viewpoint from the European Union. That's clearly not been borne out in how this is operating on the ground. We cannot restore the Northern Ireland Assembly, and that means day-to-day issues in Northern Ireland are being neglected. So this has to happen, and we need both sides around the table to move and agree a way forward.
Christian?
Well, I think it's coming down to a rather simplistic idea that if this goes through, all the problems are resolved overnight. And if anything, like Jess said, I think we're creating more problems down the line. Is this with the global Britain that we all want to be seen as we're trying to create new trade deals, that if we don't like it in 2 years' time, we're going to rip it up? I don't think that's anything any of us should be aspiring for. Are there details that need ironing out? Yes, but that flexibility also needs to come from us. So I think if we are coming forward with concrete proposals like the Green Lane, we need to be speaking with those to our European partners and saying, well, if you don't like it, what can we agree on, and try to find a meaningful solution, just as opposed to trying to rip it up and take our bat and ball home because we don't like it.
Right, and Labour's view is closer alignment with the EU in terms of the single market. That's certainly what Keir Starmer has suggested, a veterinary agreement that would mean that we're all inside the EU single market.
Well, I don't think it's gone that far. I think in terms of what we're saying, we do need to have these conversations. We do need to be getting closer in terms of good faith so we can find a meaningful solution that's right for the island of Ireland as it is for the United Kingdom. We're not there yet, but again, it all comes down to good faith.
Let's have a look at this headline in the Daily Mail. New Rwanda flight farce. As Priti Patel faces appeals from all 31 migrants due on first plane tomorrow, will it even take off? Now, this is following the High Court ruling on Friday that the flight taking asylum seekers to Rwanda can go ahead. But despite that, the same coalition of charities who lost that case on Friday last week have gone to the appeal court against the decision. And there are also individual claims, as you can see there, on behalf of all 31 of the migrants due to go to Rwanda. This, though, happened in the last half an hour or so, is a tweet from one of those groups, which we can show you, actually saying that a number of the appeals, hopefully it'll come up in just a moment, there it is, Care for Calais, breaking another Rwanda deportee has had his ticket cancelled. 21 people have now had their Rwanda tickets cancelled, but 10 still have live tickets for tomorrow. So this is obviously ongoing and will be throughout today and into tomorrow. Let's hear what the Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to say about it. Oh, we don't seem to have Boris Johnson there. We'll wait for that for a little bit later. Scott, just looking at that, there is a possibility that that flight goes tomorrow with just one person on it. In what way will that act as a deterrent, which is the point of this policy?
Well, we can't prejudge events. We will see what transpires tomorrow. The point of this Rwandan proposal, and indeed the Nationality and Borders Bill, is to smash these criminal gangs who are exploiting vulnerable people by bringing them across the channel, and to also make sure we can stop these endless, vexatious appeals which come forward time and time again and stop people being deported when they have no right to be here. I'm fully in support of a proposal. It will act as a deterrent, but we have to get this policy off the ground, and that's why it's so important.
Quite literally.
These flights, indeed, these flights take place as scheduled tomorrow.
Right. Well, a government source told the Mail on Sunday that they will operate the flight even if there is just one person on it. We don't know whether that's exactly what will happen. But the government still justifies its policy and its value as a deterrent to channel boats. I think we can now hear what the Prime Minister had to say.
always said that it would begin with a lot of teething problems and you would have a lot of legal action against it. But and they would try and delay it, and that's inevitable. But what we're trying to do is stop the business model of criminal gangs who are preying on people, moving them across the channel in unseaworthy vessels, risking their lives and sometimes costing their lives.
Give it a bit of time, Christian, it'll work.
Well, I don't think it will. I mean,
why?
In regards to acting as a deterrent, the proposal has been in the offing for a number of weeks, if not months now, and actually we've not seen a vast reduction in the number of small boats that have come in. I think in terms of what we really should be doing, we should be looking at terms of creating more safe routes into the UK, putting more money back into international aid to try and tackle some of the issues that people are actually trying to flee from. That's a way to actually break these criminal gangs. I think everyone can agree the criminal gangs is an atrocious, it needs to be tackled. But this isn't the right way to do it. I mean, deporting people to Rwanda, where there's issues, in terms of if you're LGBT or from different minorities, this isn't the be-all and end-all solution that everyone tries to make, especially when the likes of Denmark and Israel have tried it and it's failed.
With respect, Christian, again, this is a bill you've already voted for. You've spoken in Parliament about people travelling through safe countries, quote unquote. You said they are very often travelling through safe countries. Essentially, they have a shopping trolley as to what they want to see, which amounts to economic migration. You rightly recognise the problem. That's why I voted for the Nationality and Borders Bill.
I recognise the problem. I think this is a very different solution, and I think the solution itself is wrong. I don't think it's going to act as a deterrent. I don't think this is the solution in trying to tackle these criminal gangs. And we do need to look at a more compassionate solution for it.
All right, well, you've talked about more safe and legal routes. Scott, there is an issue. If the number of people has been whittled down already in terms of going on that plane tomorrow, and that happens every single time that there is a crossing of people coming across the channel, how will it act as a deterrent?
Well, as the Prime Minister said, we knew this policy was going to be attacked by left-wing woke lawyers. It is at the moment. We have to find a way through, though. If the flight takes place with just several people on, that will then set a precedent. Flights will go every single week from the Home Office, and then we can build up the numbers going forward. It is absolutely integral that we smash the pull factors, bringing people over here smuggled in illegally by people smuggling gangs. So if the flight does go tomorrow with a few people on, that will be a success, and then over the coming months we will gradually erode those pull factors which are bringing people in.
What about the cost impact of it as well? I mean, if you're chartering flights for one person, the entire policy is not cost-effective. It's not delivering what you actually want it to deliver.
We're talking about the longer term here. If we can eliminate those
there's no
pull
long-term view for it whatsoever. It's just trying to catch a headline.
Don't talk over each other. Say that again. Sorry, people can't hear if you talk over each other.
We can eliminate those pull factors for people coming over the channel. This will prove cost-effective in the long term. I'm afraid at the moment we're putting up 30,000 people in hotel rooms. This is costing the taxpayer billions of pounds a year. We have to start somewhere. This is the right policy, but we need to give it time to work.
The Mail says it's a farce, this whole situation. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I can see that readers and ordinary people would think it's a farce. You have this flagship policy. We're meant to be deporting illegal migrants over to Rwanda to whittle down those numbers. Yet we see it time and time again stuck in the courts, both the policy in and of itself, but also these individual cases. The proof of this policy, the proof has to be in the pudding, I think. People will want to see numbers coming down. They'll want to see proof it has been a deterrent. And so I reckon the PM has 6 months, say, to get this up and running, get it working, prove that they can get those numbers down. And I think if it doesn't start yielding those results, I think you will start seeing some disquiet about it on the Tory benches.
Yes, well, I'll ask you. I mean, 6 months, is that how long you'll give it?
Potentially. I mean, we have to be honest here. It's going to take a long time to go through the courts, but I think we will see throughout the summer numbers falling as this policy gets up and running.
All right, well, that's
the intention of it.
That's your prediction. Jess, what do you think the likely outcome is of this policy?
I mean, I think on a very kind of cynical level, having this fight with lefty woke lawyers on the front of tabloids or on the front of the Daily Mail is something that is a kind of a win-win for the government. That is that they're perfectly prepared to have those fights over costs, over legal action, in order to detract, but perhaps from the argument. And we've, but even in this conversation, been, we're not talking as much about the moral implications of enacting a policy like this, getting wrapped up as, is it cost effective to send one person to Rwanda rather than is it morally right for us to send one person to Rwanda?
Can I come back on that? I would say actually the opposite. I think we've heard a lot of discussion, a lot of tough talk from Priti Patel, this Home Office, about getting those numbers down. Actually, papers like mine, The Sun, will want to see those numbers come down, and they'll want to see that those policies have worked. So I don't think this is just picking a fight because in and of itself that gets you good headlines in papers like mine or The Mail. I think actually now this government, one of their flagship policies is to toughen up those borders and to stop these arrivals. And we will hold them to account, just like we always have previously.
All right, let's talk about this headline in the BBC News. I think we can show you about Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer investigated over late gift and earnings registrations. We mentioned it there in the headlines. It broke earlier this morning. Of course, as we know, the fact that an inquiry is taking place doesn't mean that any rules have been broken, and the Labour Party say they will be responding. But Jess, he's under investigation by Durham Police for a possible breach of COVID regulations. Now he's being investigated by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner. What's happening?
Yeah, I mean, ostensibly, it seems to be that he declared a couple of things a couple of days late. I have to say my eyebrows raised when I was told that explanation because, it seems extraordinary for a full investigation to be open if that's the case, but perhaps it is, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for now. But I think one of the ways that this is something that Labour MPs are quite worried about when it comes to Starmer is if you portray yourself as the kind of bastion of honesty, as Mr. Rules, as Lisa Nandy, you make yourself a great comparison to the Prime Minister who flagrantly, disobeys the rules as we've seen. But you can get caught out on almost anything, even the most minor breaches people are going to see as a gotcha. And I think that is a dangerous path that Keir Starmer's kind of set himself.
Yes, because he's ridden the bar, hasn't he, in terms... Well, you've been looking at this, Kate, in terms of views towards Sir Keir Starmer and attitudes. In various polling done for you, seen as boring, dull and bland by voters, with half feeling negative about Labour leaders, the survey finds. Tell us about the survey.
Yeah, sorry, Labour. Sorry to upset Keir. This is this word cloud. We had one earlier in the year about Boris. This is a poll JL Partners have done about what comes to your mind when you think of Keir. They asked 2,000 voters. And I'm afraid the majority say boring, dull. I can't remember the other words now, but all along those lines. I was putting a story up yesterday and my leader writer came over to me and they said, is the Pope Catholic? So I think that probably shows you what most people think about Keir Starmer. His big problem is that he can't excite his party, he's struggling to excite his party, his voters, and he's struggling to cut through. The interesting thing about this poll, actually, is that they say it's maybe not the total end of the world being boring, because apparently he's so boring that voters switch off even when there's quite spicy allegations against him. So with the Durham Beergate saga, obviously he's being investigated by police for that. But apparently they just find him such a turn-off that they don't really pay much attention to the bad headlines, let alone the good.
Well, you defected from the Conservative Party. I think everybody's caught up with that now, to Labour earlier this year. Christian, what was it that attracted you to Keir Starmer's Labour Party?
Well, I think at the time when you saw that there was a party and a leader that was wanting to show respect to the British people, I think we've seen that in the last 4 or 5 months, if not longer, that actually Boris Johnson isn't. He cares about Boris Johnson. And we saw that with last week and offering for jobs just to save his own neck, the red meat policies going out where actually they're not tackling any of the issues that are trying to address people. But the fact that back in January the 19th, they were the only party talking about the cost of living crisis. And it's taken 4 months to drag the Chancellor kicking and screaming to the chamber to actually try to deal something about it. And again, coincidentally, just as the Prime Minister was going through some difficulties. But when I speak to Keir, when I look at Keir, I see someone who is fit to govern. I see someone who does hold himself to a higher moral integrity standard than the Prime Minister.
Except he is being investigated, as we said twice. Of course, we're waiting the outcome of both. Do you have any regrets, Christian, about your decision earlier this year, when there's another poll for the Observer Opinion, which found with voters that Boris Johnson makes a better Prime Minister than Keir Starmer would, despite Partygate, the cost of living crisis, and the confidence vote in Johnson held by MPs?
No. And I think that's one poll from Opinium, I think it was.
It was.
I think we'll take that as certainly an outlier. So I think for all the other polls that I've been seeing, I've been holding Keir higher than Boris Johnson. You know, the Labour Party higher than the Tories in pretty much every field, including the economy. So in terms of, you know, do I have any regrets? No.
Right, I mean, you're sitting there listening to all of this, Scott Benton. In the original poll that Kate has outlined, in terms of words associated with Boris Johnson, the first one voters came up with was liar.
If I can just reflect on...
Well, just you can. I will let you reflect on that. But just in terms of that, is that the sort of association you want voters to have with Prime Minister?
Well, it's not a message which comes across on the doorstep to me. I go canvassing several times a week. The Prime Minister is held in extremely high regard by voters who switched from Labour to the Conservatives in 2019. And I suspect that opinion poll you've just quoted says it all. Bland, dull, boring, leadershipless, those are all terms synonymous with Keir Starmer. Now, I'm afraid he's had 2 years to make an impact with the British people, and contrast Keir's leadership to that of Tony Blair in 94, 95 and 96. He was charismatic, he was engaging, he was young, he was ready to sweep the world of politics, and of course he went on to lead the Labour Party to a historic landslide.
Were you a big fan of Tony Blair?
Well, the point I'm making is contrast...
You switched from Labour to the Conservatives.
Tony and contrast Keir. That Labour Party 25 years ago was on the way to a huge victory. This Labour Party isn't, I'm afraid. The distrusted people are not excited by Keir Starmer at all, and I'm not surprised that people in that opinion poll prefer Boris to lead the country than Sir Keir.
Christian?
Well, I think Scott's been a bit disingenuous. I think it's very difficult to go out and spread the message when, for a big chunk of 2 years, you know, you're stuck in an office behind a desk because of COVID lockdowns. Yes, there's more to be done, and I think some of the speeches and policies coming out are there that actually do attract people. But we will see a lot in a couple of weeks' time when we go to Wakefield.
But what about authenticity? You talked about the by-elections there, Wakefield, and there's one in Tiverton and Honiton coming up next week. We've heard your views through this programme on Rwanda, on the economy, on the Northern Ireland Protocol, and they are markedly different to your views that you expressed last year. How can people know in your constituency that you are a true Labour MP? Well,
I don't think they are markedly different. I was certainly a centrist then. I'm still a centrist now. But when I go, similar to Scott, and I go knocking on doors, I've had people, you know, thank you for me. I even had someone give me a hug on the doorstep, which was a surprise.
I can recall some of your comments in WhatsApp groups about Sir Keir and Angela. They were very flattering as well.
I can think of many comments about Boris as well. But I can, think of many people who've, during the Jubilee weekend, been able to have a very good conversation with them. They do believe it. I don't care if Scott believes it or not.
Well, let's see what Scott thinks. I mean, we know already, but here's a tweet from you, Scott. Very disappointed in Christian Wokeford, you call him. The people of Bury South elected a Conservative representative to support a Conservative agenda. The Labour Party no longer reflects the values of former Red Wall voters, and neither does Christian Wakeford. Is that really a mature way and approach to politics?
Well, I think people will see that for what it is. Light-hearted. Well, light-hearted. People are elected under one banner in this country, Conservative, Labour, SNP. I think it breaks a bond of integrity and honesty, which Christian has spoke about this afternoon, with your electors if you're elected as part of a blue or red team and then cross the floor.
Well,
and
we've just had the people of Bury South who have overwhelmingly voted for Labour representation in the local government elections this year, to the point where over 7,000 people voted Labour more than the Tories. So they clearly do want to be represented by Labour.
Well, I mean, I suppose you could say one thing, Scott. Since Christian defected, Boris Johnson has been found to have broken the law, been issued with a fixed penalty notice and had a confidence vote where 148 of your colleagues found they didn't have confidence in him. Maybe he's prescient.
Not at all. Boris still has an 80-seat majority, and I'd put my money on him being returned at the next.
Well, he doesn't have support.
All right, well, that is all we have time for. Thank you to all of my guests, and I will, of course, be back tomorrow with Politics Live at 12:15. Bye-bye.